Hello, welcome, and good evening. My name is Susan Lynch. I am the Associate Director of Lifetime Learning at the University of Virginia's Office of Engagement. We are so pleased to have all of you join us this evening. This is the 5th Crafting Cocktails event that we have hosted, so it's turned into a bit of a series, and we're so pleased to see familiar names and faces out there. Welcome back. And wonderful to see new names and faces as well. We are fortunate to have Suzanne Moomaw this evening. She is the director of the University of Virginia Press. She will introduce us to UVA Press and to Micah LeMon, our main speaker. Micah will answer questions submitted before and during the program. You may enter a question in the chat box below. You will also find resources in the chat box as well. Please also note this program is being recorded and will be posted in Lifetime Learning's podcast library. You will also find recordings of our other cocktail programs there, so you might want to check that out soon. So again, we are so happy that you joined us this evening, and to get us started, I'm going to pass the program over to Suzanne. So Suzanne, please take it away.
Thanks so much, Susan. I'm delighted to be here to introduce some new folks, but to reintroduce Micah LeMon to all of you. I'm representing UVA Press, which is the University Scholarly Press. We've been in business right here on Sprigg Lane for about 60 years, publishing about 70 books a year, 2,000 over the span of our lifetime in the humanities, history, architecture, culture, and certainly regional and local books, of which Micah's was one, so we're delighted about that. Micah's craft has put a stamp not just on terrific cocktails, but on the creation of a cultural experience. His approach to cocktails and the spirits and ingredients within takes us on a journey from ice making to tonight's theme, homemade bitters, one of my favorites. His creativity at the Alley Light Bar has affected the palates of people from across the Commonwealth and the nation for the better. As we will learn tonight, a good cocktail is never a random concoction. I'm delighted to introduce you to Micah LeMon.
Hey, so it is my pleasure to be with you guys again to talk some cocktails. Tonight, we're going to talk about kind of one of the more interesting threads you can pull on when it comes to cocktails, and that is the flavor of bitter in cocktails and its application. And where does bitter come from? How is it that we're able to detect it? Why would we want to? And how on earth does this flavor of bitter end up almost exclusively in the culinary world, just inside of bottles? Behind the bar? These are questions we're going to try to tackle tonight. So I thought it would be nice to have something to sip on while we're having our discussion tonight. We're going to make 2 cocktails tonight. We're going to make the 2 cocktails to me that are the most, cocktails that feature bitterness and bitters the most. So we're going to make an old fashioned first, and at the end of the class, we're going to make a Negroni or some kind of Negroni riff. So let's start by making this old-fashioned cocktail. And I'm going to tilt my screen down here just so you guys can see what I'm doing here. Got a little glass here. So I like to start by making an old-fashioned with just putting a little peel of orange in a glass right here. And you can use, an orange wedge. I just like a little orange peel. You just get the oil and, the flavor of the orange without the juice and all the mess. And, it's just the flavor and the aesthetics are a little more clean for me. The next thing we're going to do is add about 2 ounces of bourbon whiskey. You could use a rye. I'm going to use a little Buffalo Trace here. And I like my cocktails just a little on the sweet side. So I'm going to use a short 2 ounces of bourbon. If you like your cocktails a little more boozy, you might want to do a little bit more. And then we're going to add a little bit of simple syrup, about a 1/2 ounce of simple syrup. And this recipe, Dana and Susan should be posting this in the chat box. So if you missed out on what I said, you should be able to reference that. Then we're going to add about 2 dashes of Angostura cocktail bitters. This is an iconic cocktail bitters. You can find it even at most dive bars. It's the old-fashioned bitters that people use in old fashions. We're going to do 2 robust dashes of this. And when we dash it, we really want to dash it. So at this point, our cocktail's pretty good. We could throw some ice in there and it would be just fine. Or we could jazz it up just a little bit with the addition of some kind of complementary bitters. We could use some Angostura orange bitters. We could use a little Reagan's orange bitters. Or what we do at the Alley Light is we use a bitters that we make with some cherry and some sassafras. I'm going to do about 6 drops of this. And before you despair and roll your eyes at your inability to get a hold of this, I'm going to show you how to make it right after we make this cocktail here. So all we do now is just add a little ice. If you guys remember from our previous class that the old fashioned is really an old cocktail. It actually predates all other American cocktails and also predates the techniques of shaking and stirring, which were pioneered in the 1850s and 1890s respectively. And this cocktail is probably about 225 years old. All we do is just give it a little stir here with some ice for about 10 seconds. And we should be good. Okay, let's make sure this is an okay cocktail. Okay, this is good. And I'm going to deliver this to my dog sitter so we keep my boxer out of this photo shoot. Okay, now we're going to show you how to make those cherry sassafras bitters. So a lot of people had questions about what are bitters? How do you make bitters? What's the deal with bitters? Bitters are simply an alcoholic tincture of bittering herbs and flavoring herbs. So those are really the only 3 things that you need in cocktail bitters. You need some kind of alcohol base to infuse your bittering herbs and flavoring herbs. You need some bittering herbs and you need some flavoring herbs. So in the case of our cherry sassafras bitters, our big flavors are cherry, sassafras, and we're also going to bump up our bitterness with a little bit of cinchona. So I'm going to show you how to do that real quick. This is our little palette of bitter ingredients here. Let's see here. So we've got a jar that we're going to use to hold everything. We've got 2 cups of a high proof alcohol. We're going to use 2 cups of Smirnoff 100. You could use an overproof rum, or you could use an overproof whiskey, or whatever overproof thing you can get your hands on. This is going to act as our solvent here. We've got 2 cups of dried cherries. This is going to be our primary flavoring agent. Just add these right in there. And then I've got about a teaspoon of cinchona bark. We're going to talk about this a little bit in our discussion. This is going to be our bittering agent. Now at this point, we've got cocktail bitters. A couple weeks, separate out the solids, and this liquid will be, essentially cocktail bitters. Now we can jazz it. We could leave it like this, or we can jazz it up just a little bit. I'm going to jazz this up by adding some complementary flavoring agents. And this is, I'm not really reinventing the wheel. I'm just kind of doing some things that sound like they would go good with cherries, a little cherry pie ingredient. So vanilla, got some cinnamon, got some cloves. And again, this recipe will be posted in the chat box if you guys want to refer to this. I'm kind of blazing through it here. We've got a little bit of star anise we'll add in there. Got a little bit of mace. Just for a little evergreen note, we got some juniper berries. I've got a little bit of orange peel. And we've got cinchona in here to bitter our cocktail bitters, we're going to add some complementary bittering ingredients here. I've got some sassafras root. This stuff is incredibly fragrant. It's really yummy in cocktail bitters. And then I got some wild cherry bark, just kind of on a whim. We're going to throw that in there too. And that's it. That's cocktail bitters. And all we have to do is wait a couple weeks for this to infuse. We're going to strain out the solids. We can do a secondary infusion if we want to. I'm going to give you the protocol for that in the chat box if you want to fiddle with it. But essentially, that's it. You've made yourself some cocktail bitters that are really good in an old fashioned. Okay, well, let's dive into our topic here. We had a couple questions here about bitters here before we do a full dive. Sylvia Strickus asked, if we aren't going to make our own bitters, what are some good local purveyors to buy from? You can get some bitters from the ABC store. You can get some cocktail bitters from Market Street Wine Shop. You can get some from the Spice Diva. The Spice Diva also sells the ingredients to make cocktail bitters if you guys want to make your own. Mary Klein asked, how long do homemade bitters last? Should they be refrigerated? They last a long time. The next question from Joanna Calabresi was, what is the proof of bitters? Usually bitters are about 35% alcohol. And because they're high alcohol, this helps us answer Mary's question, how long do they last? They last a long time. They last on the order of years. And you can refrigerate them if you want to. You don't need to. It's fine. Okay, so let's dive into our topic here. If you guys have taken some of my classes before, you have heard me talk a little bit about my background. I grew up in a Pentecostal Christian home without any exposure to alcohol. I gained exposure to alcohol very randomly as a 20-year-old working at a country club where I was a busboy, and occasionally I'd get thrown behind a banquet bar and told to bartend. This was a very disorienting experience for me. I set up this banquet bar, smelled all these spirits that I was pouring for people. I thought they were incredibly potent and gross and disgusting, and I couldn't understand how anyone would want to drink these things. And I remember asking my boss, like being anxious about, how do I make all these drinks? Like, are they going to have weird names, and will I know what's in them? And he's like, well, really the only thing you need to know how to make is an old fashioned. So he shows me how to make an old fashioned, mashes up some fruit with some sugar cubes, puts a bunch of whiskey in there, and then puts some cocktail bitters. And I was like, well, what's that last thing you put in there? It's like, it's cocktail bitters. And I just thought that this was complete madness, that you have, this injudicious amount of whiskey, and the only thing else you put in it is something that's bitter. And it struck me as just completely crazy. But as it turns out, this trio of flavors, when proportioned correctly and when technically executed properly, it can be really yummy. And hopefully you guys are experiencing this as you're sipping on your old fashioned. The bitterness in that cocktail really helps to balance our other two components. So yes, we have whiskey in there. Yes, we have some sugar in there, but hopefully, this three-legged stool of our three ingredients is making our whiskey not too alcoholic. We can taste the whiskey without it punching us in the throat. We can taste the sweetness without it being cloyingly sweet. And this bitterness is really helping to bring balance to all of those flavors without itself being unpleasantly, overly bitter. So in the context of cocktails, the flavor bitter really helps us balance our other two flavors of spirit and sweet. And especially when we make stirred cocktails, knowing how to deploy this flavor bitter is really indispensable. So more fundamentally, why can we taste the flavor bitter? And these are the questions we want to answer today. Why would we want to? What makes things bitter? And what are the bittering agents used in cocktails? So why can we taste bitter? That's a deep question here, because if you think about, the taste that you have on your palate that you can detect sweet, you can detect savory or fatty, you can detect sour, and you can detect salty. And all four of those flavors give us some kind of, good biological evolutionary advantage. So sweet and savory things are reliably going to be good sources of calories. So we want to be able to detect those so we can eat them and maintain our biomass and acquire new biomass if we need to. We want to be able to detect whether things are really sour, because we don't want to upset the pH in our stomach and the rest of our organs. And then we also need to be able to detect what things are salty, so that we can, maintain a balance of salt and minerals that we need for our blood and our organs. So what is it about this flavor bitter? Why would we be able to taste this? There must be some juice to the squeeze here, because, we don't invest in things. We don't invest in structures usually biologically that don't yield us any kind of advantage. So as it turns out, our sensitivity to bitterness is a sense that evolved probably about 2 million years ago. And I'm going to give you kind of the potted explanation of why we are sensitive to this flavor bitter. If this is something that really interests you, I would encourage you to Google University of Pennsylvania. There's a researcher that has a lab named Sarah Tishkoff, and she's done some of the research that I'm going to be referencing. And she also has some nuanced kind of additional things that kind of flesh out what I'm going to tell you. So let me show you my little diagnostic strip here. So if you guys have ever come to the bar and hung out with me and talked about bitter things, chances are I will pull out one of these little pieces of paper, PTC test strip paper, and I'll give you one of these little pieces of paper, and I'll tell you, hey, put this on your mouth, on your tongue, and see what you taste. And to me, this tastes kind of bitter. And the sensitivity to this chemical, phenolphthaliurea, is governed by the TAS2R38 gene. And essentially, if you remember from your genetics class, you have 2 copies of all your chromosomes. You get one from your mom and from your dad. And if you have any combination of a taster allele, anything that's sensitive to bitterness, when you taste this strip of paper, you're going to be very sensitive to it or somewhat sensitive to it. If you have 2 non-taster alleles, you're not going to be sensitive to it at all. So the hypothesis is that we evolved a sensitivity to bitterness because humans eat just about anything. We'll eat bugs, we'll eat animals, we'll eat mushrooms, we'll eat plants. And early hominids needed to find out what plants were safe to eat. And frequently, this flavor bitterness is indicative of plant toxicity. So you can imagine that if you don't have these taster alleles, if you're a non-taster and you're munching down on the stuff that's bitter and you can't detect it and is potentially toxic, you're going to die. Whereas, the guy who can taste the bitter plants can taste it, spit it out, and avoid poisoning himself. So we see that this adaptation is amplified in early human populations, and the chances are, if you don't like things that are bitter, or if you do like things that are bitter, your genes are in part to blame. So the $1 million question for me is, if bitterness is indicative of toxicity, then why on earth are we putting bitter things in our cocktails or seeking out this bitter flavor? And I think that this is pretty interesting. And it just kind of underscores how human populations benefit from diversity. And, as much as I, get on social media and might not enjoy the opinions of whoever's politics or vaccination status or whatever they're saying about, global whatever, we benefit from having a multiplicity of opinions and strategies to investigate everything. We need the data. And so somewhere we had some early hominids that investigated bitter plants, and they made some really cool discoveries, especially in gastronomy, medicine, and with regard to recreational drugs. Okay, so what makes plants bitter? So plant bitterness in many cases is due to the presence of a class of molecules called alkaloids. So Dana, would you cue my very official Venn diagram with my alkaloids bubble? So alkaloids are a class of compounds that are universally bitter. And they're indicated by bitter taste in the mouth for human beings. And most of these alkaloids have some type of biological activity for humans. Some of them are toxic, some of them are medicinal, or some of them are recreational compounds, or some combination of the three. So if you're a caveman and you taste something bitter, there's a good clue to you that, you know, this might be poison, but it also might be drugs. In any case, it's going to be a tool. So, you know, this is for me, this is the real motive for humans to investigate this flavor bitter, is that it's incredibly useful. This is like, you know, almost kind of like fire. If you can master it, you know, you can figure out how to either destroy your neighbors or you know, keep yourself alive. So we mentioned that some of these are toxic. We mentioned that some of these are recreational compounds, and most of the fun chemicals that we consume for drugs are alkaloids, including caffeine. Obviously, an alkaloid comes from the coffee plant and other plants. Cocaine comes from alkaloid from the coca plant. Nicotine, alkaloid from tobacco. Theobromine is a mood-enhancing alkaloid found in cocoa beans. And psilocin is an alkaloid that comes from mushrooms, well, from the plant, fungi kingdom. So why is it that plants make alkaloids? And this is also an interesting thing to me. So plants make alkaloids because essentially they need some way to protect themselves. So they could have some kind of really spiny skin. They could have, you know, they could have scales on the outside of them. They could have bark on the outside of them, or they could have some type of chemical defense. So alkaloids are a chemical defense of plants, and humans, being the clever chimps that we are, have figured out a way to hack these chemicals for our own benefit and use them as medicinal compounds, recreational compounds, or in some cases as intentionally toxic compounds. We're kind of done with that slide if you want to keep it up, or however you want to run the thing there. So I mentioned that there's a lot of compounds that are recreational. There's also a bunch that are medicinal. I thought we'd talk about just a couple that you guys have heard of that you probably consumed yourself. If you've ever had a headache, you have probably taken an aspirin. Aspirin is formulated from alkaloids from the willow tree. Humans have been chewing on willow tree bark for at least 2,000 years. And Bayer has sold the drug aspirin since 1889. So this is a really old analgesic that we've been using for a long time. If you've ever been in the hospital and had surgery, chances are you've probably been given some type of opiate. Opiates contain alkaloids derived from the poppy plant. We've been using opiates for a really long time too, for at least 1,500 years. We've been using laudanum for at least 500 years. We're really connected, especially to these two alkaloids in willow tree bark and the poppy. And also increasingly in the past 100 years, we've investigated other plants that are rich in alkaloids for medicine, and they've turned up to be really good, especially at fighting cancer. So the rosy periwinkle and the Pacific yew tree Both have a bunch of alkaloids, which are used to create anti-cancer drugs, especially the rosy periwinkle has alkaloids that help fight leukemia and Hodgkin's disease. So we really get a lot of bang for our buck with these alkaloids from plants. So then the final thing to tie all this together is, why did ancient humans put bitter plants in booze and not just in water? And that's a fair question. And the answer is, these are organic molecules. They're going to make a better solution in an organic solvent. So one of the most ubiquitous organic solvents, and one of the organic solvents that's most compatible with human biology, is ethanol. Anytime we have a sugary liquid, it's going to ferment and give us ethanol, an organic solvent. So, people have been putting bitter herbs in things like wine and beer for thousands of years. And it's just kind of in the past 500 years that we started making really intensely medicinal bitters that are spirit-based. And this is exactly how we get the old-fashioned cocktail, right? So I don't know how many of you guys were on our previous call. We talked a little bit about the history of the old-fashioned. The old-fashioned was originally described in 1806 as spirits of any kind, sugar, a little bit of water, and some bitters. What it doesn't tell you in that first printing is that the first three ingredients were part of a beverage called sling, which was one of the most abused beverages in the latter part of the 1700s, such that alcoholism was a big problem, especially around the turn of the century in 1800. And people were drinking so much of this stuff sling that being hungover was a big problem. So what do you do when you're hungover? You have a little hair of the dog, and you have the equivalent of some Alka-Seltzer, and that would be in the form of medicinal bitters. So this is literally exactly how we get cocktails in the United States, and how we have the birth of the cocktail culture. It's by having medicines added to our alcoholic beverages. And through an accident of history, Americans discovered that this bitter note in the medicinal bitters helped to balance the other components in their beverage. Okay, do we want to pause for any questions here, Susan, or should we keep rolling? I'm flexible.
Yeah, let me see if I have some. So someone asked, Cynthia asked, where can one purchase the juniper, sassafras, and wild cherry bark?
Yeah, you can get that locally at the Spice Diva. Phyllis has got a good stock of some things. It's also nice because you can buy just like a teaspoon of something, as opposed to having to buy like a half a pound of something. If you want to buy them in large quantities, I buy a lot of stuff from the restaurant at a online source called Mountain Rose Herbs. They're out of Oregon. Most of their stuff is certified organic, but it's not super crazy expensive, but you do get a larger quantity of stuff. Yeah, I would check out the Spice Diva. I also know that Rebecca's has like some good bulk stuff, and also Integral Yoga does too.
So the Charlottesville places, but I'm sure they do have website information that people can go to. And also a question, I think this has to do with the old fashioned, and you used both the Angostura bitters and the cherry bitters. Yes.
Yeah, so I like, so this is iconic old fashioned bitters, and like you really want to make sure you at the very least put this in your old fashioned cocktail. And at that point you can kind of gild the lily and add, an accent of whatever it is that you want. A little orange bitters, some cherry sassafras bitters, some espresso bitters. Just use some bitters that seems to be complementary to what the flavors that are in your old fashioned. I wouldn't use like celery bitters or lavender bitters. It just kind of clashes. But my whole thing is flavors complementing, but a lot of people, their whole thing is flavors contrasting. So there's a million different ways to crack an egg, but that's how I think about it.
Okay, so Liz says, have you heard of soda and bitters as the ultimate hangover cure?
Yes, and I have to admit that I've used it before when I've made poor decisions. I have not used it, hopefully, too many times in my life. So yeah, bitters are prescribed as medicine. We'll get into this in the next little bit, but all of these bitter things that are behind the bar have been considered to be medicines. And as recently as I think the 1960s, if you got a bottle of Fernet Branca, it would say things like, have a teaspoon of this as a laxative, or for flatulence. Like these are literally things that were put on the bottle, medicinal advertisements for, the wonders of these bitter plants, bitter solutions. So yeah. And also there's certainly a little placebo effect in there. If you believe that the bitters and soda is going to help your hangover, then 30% of the time it will. So that doesn't hurt either.
All right, we'll have one more and then we can move on. But if Teresa's asking if you want to get your own sassafras root, is there a time of year you need to harvest it?
Yeah, that's a good question. I got this stuff that I used from a forager, guy named Digger J, and he harvests stuff in the wintertime. He says that if you harvest it in the wintertime, that's all of the blood and guts and yummy stuff from the tree goes back into the roots, and that's the best time to get harvest the roots is during the winter. He's a crusty old dude, but I'll take his word for it. So.
All right, great. All right, we'll get back to questions, I guess, a little bit later.
Okay, so we talked about, how we're able to detect this flavor bitter, how bitter things end up in our bottles. Let's talk about the three main bitter plants that are used to flavor cocktails. So there's three of them, and we'll just go right through them: wormwood, cinchona, and gentian. And so these are not things that you would find in your supermarket. And this is kind of what makes these, when someone says, what makes this bitter? And I say, gentian, people are like, well, that's that. And I'd say, it's a plant. And they're like, okay, I still don't really know what it is. So we're going to talk about these things. I'm also going to show you some photos just so we can kind of connect some dots here. So Dana, if you want to cue that first photo of wormwood, let's see here. Yeah, wormwood. So this is wormwood. It's a common garden plant. And again, I grew up, super Pentecostal, reading all the Christian literature when I was a kid. And I read C.S. Lewis's book, Screwtape Letters, and I just thought wormwood was a character in this book. And when I started reading about the history of the plant wormwood, I felt very obtuse because wormwood is called wormwood, lo and behold, because it has historically been used to combat parasitic worm infections. It's not just called wormwood for fun. It's actually an incredibly effective medicine to combat worm infections. And if you guys have ever traveled to a part of the world where you can get malaria, and you have gotten malaria, chances are you've been given a drug called artemisinin, which is one of the most effective anti-malarial drugs. Artemisinin is made with alkaloids that are derived from the genus Artemisia, which includes all of the wormwoods that we know, especially grand wormwood, Artemisia absinthineum. And this is the wormwood that's used to flavor things like vermouth, absinthe, and other bittersweet cordials like chartreuse, and some of the other lesser known things like Malort and Amaro Altaverde. The leaves and the blossoms, you can go to the next slide, the one with the little yellow cutting board. The leaves and the blossoms of the wormwood plant are the most commonly used part of the plant for application for beverages. And this is a little photo. It's a beautiful moment in my work day here. I just picked some wormwood blossoms from my wormwood bush. The easiest way to get a hold of some of these ingredients is to grow them yourself. And wormwood is a common garden plant. Sometimes in the summers, if you live on the downtown mall or if you visit the downtown mall, they'll plant wormwood in those big potbelly planters. So it's a real common garden plant. And I was making some wormwood tincture here to make some vermouth with. The flavor of wormwood is it's very metallic, and it's almost kind of like sage with metal, and almost like just like a little hint of like a green herb. So let's see. Yeah, and this is an incredibly powerful source of alkaloids. Even today, genus alkaloids from the Artemisia family are being used in medicines that treat Crohn's disease, kidney disorders, and other stomach maladies. The next bitter let's talk about is this guy. This is a cinchona tree, very unassuming tree, and there's some interest. This is interesting to me. This is a tree that historically was only found in the New World. So it's a tree from South America. So this tree did not have any, or I should say Eurasians and Africans didn't have any exposure to this tree until after Columbus's voyage. And when Spanish explorers found people in South America around this tree, they found especially people chewing on the bark of the tree when they were sick. So the bark contains an alkaloid called quinine, which is an antipyretic, which can help reduce fevers. So this is why this tree is frequently called the fever tree. And fever tree is also a popular brand of craft tonics, real yummy, little fever tree advertisement. And if you want, there's the next slide shows the bark of this tree here. Yeah, so that's the cinchona bark. So cinchona is rich in this alkaloid quinine. If you look on your bottle of tonic water, the next time you have some tonic water, it'll say contains quinine. That's that alkaloid. Quinine is also a really powerful medicine to treat malaria. If artemisinin doesn't work, usually they'll send in the closer of quinine. It won't make you feel good, but it usually will kill any malaria you've got in your system. And so quinine and cinchona weren't really used to treat malaria until the British especially had the idea of kind of exporting cinchona bark because of its antipyretic qualities to their soldiers that were suffering from malaria in other parts of the world that they were colonizing. And for better or worse, this bark right here enabled a lot of the colonization that the Brits did in the 17 and 1800s. And if this is of particular interest to you, I'd recommend reading a little bit about that. This bark right here also enabled the Allies to prevail in the South Pacific in World War II. Interesting story. So the third one that we should talk about is gentian. So gentian is, you want to cue the next slide here. Gentian is this flowering plant here. Usually it grows at high altitudes. And in the Alps is probably one of the most famous areas of the world for having gentians grow there. This grows across Eurasia, throughout China, and even into Japan. The roots of the plant are the part that is most commonly used in making beverages. You can cue that next slide. These are the they're the roots of cinchona. Gentian. Gentian is used to bitter Angostura bitters that we use in our old fashioned, Peychaud's bitters, Underberg. It's also used to bitter most of the kind of northern Italian and Alpine French bittersweet cordials, things like Aperol, Fernet Branca, Ramazzotti, Suze, Campari. It's used to bitter Americano aperitifs. And also, if you guys have ever spent any time in New England, in the United States, there is a soft drink called Moxie, which basically tastes like bitter Coca-Cola. and the bitter note comes from gentian, from this root. And last few things that are interesting to me about gentian. So gentian has two alkaloids that are really powerful. Again, I grew up reading the Bible and reading about the plagues of Egypt. The fourth plague is the plague of boils, which probably is called leishmaniasis in contemporary parlance. And believe it or not, amarogentin, which is an alkaloid found in this root right here, is something that can be used as a cure. So I guess the 43-year-old and the 10-year-old in me kind of relish the idea of Moses going throughout Egypt, passing out gentians to people who had boils on them to make them feel better. The other alkaloid it has is gentiopicrin, which, believe it or not, is good to treat liver disorders. So a strong argument could be made that if you are going to be creating extra work for your liver by drinking something with gentian in it would probably help balance you out. And these are just the main three. Most of the bittersweet things behind the bar are bittered with cinchona, gentian, and wormwood. Other notable bittering agents that you might see behind the bar are burdock root, dandelion root, licorice root, sarsaparilla, and some of the thistles like cardoon, artichoke, and other thistles. So let's see. So we talked a little bit about, so behind the bar, we've got bitter things kind of in three forms. We've got cocktail bitters, which we talked about a little bit. We've got wine-based bitters, things like vermouth and its cousins, which I like to call aromatized and fortified wines. And then we have spirit-based bitters. And this is where you take those bittering agents and put them in a higher proof spirit, things like Fernet Branca, Ramazzotti, Campari, et cetera, et cetera. So let's pull up a couple of you guys had a question about cocktail bitters. So we had Kelly Umira said, there are so many kinds and types of bitters. I never know when to use them, or I'll buy for a single type of cocktail and never use it again. Are there any basics a starter bar must have and not just kept around for the once in a million cocktail? So I've got a photo of kind of my core cocktail bitters that I like, for probably the ones that I reach for the most behind the bar. I would definitely start from right to left there. So you want to get a bottle of Angostura, then get a bottle of Peychaud so you can make a Sazerac, and maybe get some orange bitters so you can jazz up your old fashioned if you haven't made your cherry sassafras bitters yet. And then you could splurge on a bottle of Bob's Abbott's bitters. It's really, really great in especially a Manhattan cocktail. We had a question about cocktail bitters from Chris McDaniel. There's some wait time involved in making bitters, which can make experimentation a maddeningly extended process. Do you have any tips for making a base bitter formula to which you can add and other flavors? Yeah, it sounds like you're on the right track here. So you can use like a gentian, infuse a spirit with some gentian or wormwood or cinchona, and then use that to kind of infuse other flavors into. Or if you're impatient, I would recommend checking out the book Liquid Intelligence. This is a book that I reference in my cocktail book, the Bible. And Liquid Intelligence has a protocol for doing a rapid infusion under pressure in a nitrous whipper, like an ISI, like nitrous little whipped cream whipper. And it's real easy. You can do it in like 15 minutes. Okay, so those are the cocktail bitters that I would start with on your home bar. And again, these cocktail bitters are used in a dash, in like dashes. So you're not going to sit down and have a glass of Angostura bitters unless you've been bartending for 20 years like me and your palate's kind of warped. I like a glass of Angostura bitters, but most people don't, and not a whole lot of people will drink a glass of cocktail bitters. You can, however, drink a glass of vermouth. So again, vermouth is a wine-based bitter. It's basically a wine that's been infused with one of these bittering herbs and then some other flavoring herbs. Dana, if you'd like to cue the next photo, that is a photo of some of our vermouths. So these are probably the 5 vermouths that I reach for the most, or I should say the 5 wine-based bitters I reach for the most. On the right there is Carpano Antica, iconic sweet vermouth. We've got a couple of vermouths from Dolan, a dry and a white vermouth, a little richer and fatter than a dry vermouth in the middle. And then Punta Mess and Coche Americano are really yummy things to be used in place of a sweet vermouth or in place of a white vermouth, respectively. Usually these are around 17% alcohol, and these are great for, kind of to use in stirred cocktails, or you can use little accents of these in shaken cocktails to add a little depth and complexity to things. The last thing is our spirit-based bitters, or our bittersweet cordials. You can cue that next photo there. And so our vermouths are about 17%. Usually these are much higher, around 30-some%. There are some outliers, but that's usually kind of about where they land. And these are really great things, especially to have after a meal. They're a little higher in alcohol, sugar, and bitterness. Nice thing to kind of like, settle your stomach after a big meal. And I would consider, one of you guys had questions about, making gin cocktails and which dashes of whatever bitters should I use in a gin cocktail. I would consider, instead of using a dash of cocktail bitters, using a bar spoon or a 1/4 ounce of one of these bittersweet cordials or some other bittersweet cordial to add some depth and complexity to a cocktail. A little bar spoon of chartreuse or Fernet Branca is really going to add just a hint of bitterness without, overly bittering something. And it's also going to give you a lot of complexity on, when you have your cocktail pass over your palate. And we had a question. Yes, the question was from Matthew Safarik about what are your go-to bitter additives for sweet or lighter drinks. Matthew, I would recommend just a little bar spoon of some Fernet or chartreuse or Campari or what have you, especially if you're making gin cocktails. Okay, so the last thing I'm going to do is show you guys how to make a Negroni. So the Negroni is really, it's one of the best cocktails if you like bitter things. It's also really an intuitive cocktail. You have an equal parts build of gin, sweet vermouth, and Campari. Now, if we think about what those things are, gin is a spirit. A sweet vermouth is a wine-based bitter, so we could use some other wine-based bitter for that. And then Campari is a spirit-based bitter, a bittersweet cordial. So we could use some other bittersweet cordial for that. So I'm just going to show you, we're just going to riff a little bit here. We'll see how we like it here. So this is we've got some gin, we've got some sweet vermouth, and we've got some Campari. In my cocktail book, I tell you guys about classifying ingredients and substituting like ingredient for like ingredient. We're going to do that real quick. So instead of using gin, we're going to use some rye whiskey. And instead of using Campari, we're going to use Amaro Nonino. This was in that slide I just showed you. And I'm going to build a cocktail with this here real quick. Again, this is an equal parts cocktail, so we're going to do 1 ounce of spirit, some rye whiskey. And I've never made this before, so we'll see if it's yummy. My guess is it'll be a balanced cocktail if it's not yummy. A little Carpano. And we're going to add 1 ounce of spirit-based bitter. We're going to use Amaro Nonino. And if you remember from previous classes, we stir this cocktail because we don't have any juice. Also, we stir this cocktail because we want chilling and dilution to a lesser degree. And we also want certain mouthfeel We want a weighty, silky mouthfeel, not a bright, aerated one that you get with a shaken cocktail. We stir this cocktail for about 30 seconds. Our target final temperature is right around 32 degrees Fahrenheit. Usually I can tell when it's done by kind of feeling the side of my shaker. Okay, I got a little chilled cube here. And I'm going to strain this. I found a strainer. Into this glass right here. A single strain is all we need. And we're going to take a little peel of orange. We're going to express it, shoot the oil right in there. Rim our glass, and we'll perch this on the side of our cocktail glass. Okay, and we'll see how this turned out here. Yeah, that's yummy. Oh, that's delicious. I might make that at the restaurant. Okay, so this we've got some time for some questions here. If you guys want to ask anything, Susan.
Sure. Let me get to the questions here.
We can talk about Russian vodka if you want to, or we can talk about
Sure,
something.
you can mention that. We did have people ask about that. If what is the preferred non-Russian made vodka? Andrew Wolf asked that question.
Yeah, so I wouldn't. Yeah, so I think there's only a few brands that actually are made in Russia. They're just Russian branded. So like Stoli and Smirnoff. I use some Smirnoff in our bitters that Smirnoff 100. It's not because I'm some type of Russian spy. It's because Smirnoff is made in Illinois, and it's like American as apple pie. So Smirnoff and Stoli are both made in the U.S. I wouldn't be concerned about that. I think there's only a couple of brands that are made in Russia, and they're super cheap, and you probably would not be tempted to buy them anyways. So if you're looking to boycott something, there could be arguably more effective ways of aiming your attention at doing good for the whole Russia-Ukraine situation.
Right. So Andrew also asked, what is your favorite recipe for a Manhattan, and what is your preferred bourbon?
Yeah, so I've got the recipe, my preferred recipe in my cocktail book. If you would like to pick that up, if not, I'm happy to tell you what's in it. I would use rye whiskey, 2 ounces of rye whiskey. Bullet Rye works. Elijah Craig rye, I've been digging on that recently. Rittenhouse is good. An ounce of vermouth, preferably a nice quality vermouth, something like Carpano Antica or Cochi Torino, or even Punta Mess would work. And then a dash or two of Angostura bitters, or a few drops of bitters like Abbott's, Bob's Abbott's bitters. And part of the good part about learning, especially the Manhattan recipe, is like this, formula of 2 parts spirit to 1 part vermouth with just a little bit of bitters. This is kind of a basic, skeleton that you see over and over and over again with stirred cocktails. And if you can learn how to, just master that simple kind of 2 to 1 of spirit to wine-based bitter, you can, riff on stuff in your home bar just like you can with Negroni. So, yeah.
So let me get to some more here. So Emily is asking, can we get the 2-minute story of how quinine helped if I'm saying that right, the US to win World War II?
Oh yeah. So, well, yeah, I mean, like you don't really think about this, but like if you're, operating in the South Pacific and you've got soldiers stationed in, malaria infested jungles and, islands, they're going to get sick. So you need access to drugs to give them. So there was a plantation, I think in Indonesia, that was a Cinchona kind of outpost, and the Allies got it and cut the Japanese off from Cinchona supply. So they would get sick. So access to these drugs is really, it's funny. It comes from a bark from a tree that we put in tonic water. But that's the true story. And you can look this all up. It's a little more exciting and in depth than that. But those are the broad strokes. We needed Cinchona quinine to keep the sailors healthy, and having access to it and denying the Japanese access to it was a part of what helped win the war.
Great, thank you. So Emily is also saying this is her first class with you, and she's new to even drinking cocktails.
Oh.
Yeah, so she's interested in whether you would recommend focusing on one specific liquor for the beginning and then learning all the different complements and variations, or picking a short list of various basic cocktails to master before moving on to the more complicated ones. So how best way to start?
Yeah, diversity. Humans benefit from diversity. So the two things I would start with, and these are the two things I recommend in my book, learning a basic shaken cocktail and learning a basic stirred cocktail. So my basic stirred cocktail, just mentioned, is a Manhattan. You learn how to master that. You can riff on, different spirits, just plug them into that recipe. And the basic shaken cocktail I teach people is the daiquiri. It's real simple. It's rum, lime, and sugar. And, once you master those two recipes, it's just a matter of kind of substituting like ingredient for like ingredient. And I would encourage you to get more than one ingredient, just so you can kind of, see how, replacing rye whiskey in a Manhattan with bourbon, how that works. Putting scotch in there, you make a Bobby, or make I'm blanking. This cocktail went to my head here. Not a Bobby, but I can't even remember. But anyways, all of these cocktails are related, and if learning a basic recipe and substituting like ingredient for like ingredient is really going to help you understand all the ingredients in your home bar and how they work together in different ratios. So yeah. Rob Roy is the Scotch Manhattan.
Okay, there you go. It came to you. So Brian says, have you ever had a super high proof tincture? I'm having a hard time reading this without going too far here. Tinctures or bitters turn cloudy when adding filtered water to dilute, and how do you condense and keep the bitters clear?
I wouldn't worry about keeping it clear. So that phenomenon is called lushing. Lushing happens when you have too much oil or too much of an organic compound dissolved in a really high proof solvent. So, and if you lower the proof of that solvent, you lower the solubility of some of those oils in that solvent, and that's what causes it to go cloudy. There's really nothing wrong with lushing, and in some ways, lushing is proof positive that you've got a whole lot of organic molecules in your solution. Like if you add ice to Sambuca or any of those other anise flavored liqueurs, they'll lush. Some gins will lush if you add ice to them. I mean, I wouldn't get real stressed out about lushing. It's proof that you've got a lot of yummy stuff in your liquid. But if you really wanted to eliminate lushing, you could do chill filtering, which is where you bring the temperature of your liquid down, the high proof liquid down, so that some of these things will precipitate, and then you can filter that out, and so that won't lush. But I wouldn't get super hung up on lushing. That's just me.
Okay, Debbie's asking, what's your favorite mezcal?
This is not my forte, and part of it is because of some of our Byzantine laws in Virginia of getting access to these distillates. So I really don't have that much exposure to it. I did take a class with River over at the Bebedero. Learned a whole lot. Recommend you guys maybe entertain having him as a guest lecturer, or at the very least, going to drink some mezcal at his new spot, the Bebedero just moved. The two most economical mezcals that we can get in the state are Banhez and Vida Mezcal, Del Maguey Vida. Both of those are really great, especially for mixing. There is just a spectacular amount of variability, especially in mezcal. So in tequila, you can only use one species of agave, the blue Weber agave, in a very specific geographically limited area and a very specific way of preparing it. But with mezcal, you can make mezcal with, up to 1 of 2,000 different species. All these species have different, flavor profiles. They can be harvested differently, treated differently, roasted differently. So there's really just a wide variety of variability in mezcal, and it's just kind of all different strokes for different folks. A lot of, at least for me, with my very sensitive Pentecostal palate, mezcal is a lot of it is just like jet fuel, and if you're gonna taste it, you really need to do a tasting so that you can just kind of like get in there and prep your taste buds to just kind of sift through all these nuances, because there's a lot of flavors in mezcal that are just super, super potent. So hope that answers your question a little bit.
Great. So Cherry asks, how would you use walnut bitters?
Oh, excellent question. We actually have a cocktail on our current cocktail list called the Ugly Stick. It's a stirred cocktail. It's kind of like an old fashioned. It's got Copper Fox rye whiskey, some smoked maple, some black birch syrup with some foraged black birch that went out and got and made syrup out of, some black walnut bitters, and some zucca. Zucca is a spirit-based bitter flavored with gentian and flavored with Chinese rhubarb root, smoked Chinese rhubarb root. So it's kind of smoky, resinous. It's really yummy in stirred cocktails, especially cocktails that are kind of like mapley or smoky or have whiskey in them. That's kind of how I have used black walnut bitters. And Fee Brothers is really the only brand that I know of that I use. So.
Okay, we have somebody asking, do you have a botanical background? You do have a varied background like us, so this might be folks new.
Not really. I grew up kind of poor, and I didn't really have access to a lot of fancy stuff growing up, and I think that's kind of why I ended up landing and working in a fancy restaurant, just because it's all of the flavors and the smells and the fanciness is just kind of fun to be around. And part of working with those ingredients is that the best way to get access to them is by growing them. So mint's real easy to grow. So I grow a bunch of mint. I grow a bunch of herbs. So basically so that I can have fun at work. So part of my botanical orientation is just simply, wanting to have fun things to play with when I go to work. So I'll probably do this in a couple weeks. Till the Garden, go over to Fifth Season or Southern States, pick out some fun things. Hopefully the grow won't die, and hopefully I'll get to make yummy cocktails for people with those things. So that's really kind of what that's my botanical background, is just really wanting to have fun things to play with at work. And the most economical way to do that and the best way to get access to fresh ingredients is just to grow them yourself.
Okay. So Scott says, do you have thoughts on using, I don't know if I'm going to say this right, sous vide to speed up the bitter making process?
Yes, sous vide, you could do that. So that's kind of one of those things where I mentioned it's like an under pressure thing. So you could do a rapid infusion, you could do sous vide. I've never done sous vide before, just because I don't have a vacuum sealer, which you kind of need to do sous vide stuff. But you could do stuff under the pressure in a nitrous whipper. Either one would work. I haven't used sous vide just because I don't have a vacuum thing to seal the bags and put everything under pressure.
Okay, Rich is asking, do you shake or stir your martini?
I would stir a martini because it doesn't have any juice, and I prefer the mouthfeel, prefer the amount of chilling and dilution. If you want me to shake your martini, I will do it. But you know, at the end of the day, I want people to be happy, and you know, even if you ask me to do something that contradicts my technical sense or common sense, if you ask nicely, I will do it for you. So that's my answer.
JW, who I think has participated in many of your events before, said, would you love to hear, he would love to hear Micah's thoughts on Ogeat. I don't know if I say that right, ORGEAT. And should you buy or make that yourself? And then also Zucca as a bitter.
Yeah, so orgeat is, I guess, how most people pronounce that. I don't know if I'm doing it right. Orgeat, I would make that myself. So orgeat, for those of you guys who don't know, is an almond syrup or a nut syrup that's got some sugar, some orange blossom water, and usually it's fortified with something to keep it from going bad. But essentially, it's almond milk that's sweetened. And usually the almonds are roasted, so you get a little more nuttiness to it. It's one of the ingredients in a classic Mai Tai. And this is kind of kismet that you keep asking about things, because we actually have an orgeat cocktail on our menu right now at the Alley Light. We have a Mai Tai. It's just a blend of Jamaican rums, orgeat, some dry curacao, some lime, and some angostura. Serve it tiki style, some crushed ice. It's really yummy. I would make that, but you know, to do that on a scale at home, like, you know, if you don't want to get a hold of a bunch of nuts and like roast them, grind them, and strain them out, you could do a store-bought orgeat, or you could just come to the Alley Light and I'll make you a cocktail. It's going to be more authentic tasting and more almond milk tasting, and less kind of like fake almond flavoring if you make it yourself versus you get something that's store-bought. And what was the second part of that question? Orgeat, and was there a second part?
Yeah, let me get back to that. Zucca as a bitter.
Yeah. So Zucca, that's one of those things I mentioned that's in that ugly stick cocktail. So it's real smoky, and you know, my whole thought is like, pair a smoky thing with smoky thing. So we make a lot of cocktails. I've got a cocktail in a cocktail book where we pair smoky Zucca with a smoky scotch called the Mean Old Man. It's got some Campari and some Carpano Antica. It's actually like, it's a very, very minimally chopped up Negroni. It's very yummy. And, you know, people think I've done something really remarkable by putting scotch in a Negroni skeleton. It's really easy. That's a really easy way to use Zucca in a cocktail. And that's, I'm kind of ashamed that I haven't done something more creative. Well, I guess I have. I also use Zucca in a cocktail I call the Satanic Milkshake. It's a whole egg cocktail with chocolate, barley, Zucca, chinar, and smoky scotch. Shake it up real good. Top it with a flamed orange peel and some volcanic salt. Yeah, I like Zucca with chocolate, with smoky flavors, you know, with smoked maple. It's really good. Yeah, that's how I like using Zucca.
Hey, Sarah Mayhew is asking, is there a flavor chart that helps determine which bitters go with which alcohol? She's thinking of specifically of the very different kinds of flavors of gin that are now available.
Yeah, well, I touched on this a little bit in my book. I kind of have like a series of like things I like to pair with each other. And again, you know, my whole thing is doing flavors that are complementary, not contrastive. So, you know, I would just use good common sense. Like if you've got a real floral gin, like maybe you put some lavender bitters in there. If you've got a gin that's got, you know, more savory flavors, maybe you put some celery bitters in there. If you've got a gin that's real citrusy, you know, maybe you put some Reagan's orange bitters in there. or you could flip it around. My reflex is to do complement, not contrast. So that's kind of my thought process.
Hey, Deborah, this will be sort of our last question. Did Micah put orange peel in the bitter recipe or just the old fashioned?
Oh, I put it in both. Yeah. So got
okay. And I think
orange peels in there.
Someone also asked, in your bitters, how much did you determine how much of the orange peel to put in?
Oh, if orange peel were the primary flavoring agent, we'd put like 10 times as much in there. But if it's like, a little supporting actor, maybe just one or two. There's really no wrong way to do it. You'll taste it and like say, okay, well, this sucks. I can't taste this thing. You put more in there. It's just kind of trial and error. Hopefully, you enjoy doing it. And this method, I told one of your readers about doing the making bitters with a nitrous whipper is a really convenient way to be able to do something 15 minutes later, taste it, and then you can circle back and double down on an ingredient if you don't find it well represented, instead of having to wait weeks or months for the final product. So yeah, it's trial and error. Have fun. That's what I say.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Micah, for your time. I want to thank you again for another event with us with Lifetime Learning. I know that you're very busy these days, as so many of your colleagues are in the hospitality industry. It's a tough time, I understand. So we appreciate you taking time with us today, and thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us.
My pleasure.
Last thoughts you have for us?
Go forth and enjoy bitterness and cocktails, and hopefully have balance in life and cocktails and all that you do.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Micah. I appreciate it.
Nice spending time with you guys tonight.
All right, great. Thank you.
Okay, good night.
And so to close out our event, I want to thank Micah and Suzanne for being with us today, and to all of you for taking time out of your evening. There's so much going on in the world right now, and it's nice to take some time out for community, some learning, and perhaps a cocktail or two. So thank you so much. I want to take a moment and bring some upcoming Lifetime Learning programs to your attention. On Thursday, March 31st, from 3 p.m. to 4 p.m., I'm going to be hosting a virtual program entitled UVA's Center for Criminal Justice, Promoting Evidence-Based Reform. We'll be joined by members of the UVA Law School faculty to discuss their work in the center and the important topic of criminal justice reform. Then on Tuesday, April 12th, I'm hosting an in-person event at the Mariners Museum in Newport News. It's an all-day event, so I hope you'll consider joining me if you have the time for a behind-the-scenes tours of the museum's exhibits and their conservation labs of the USS Monitor, which was a Civil War battleship that sunk off the coast of North Carolina. So we'll be able to go into the labs and view some of the artifacts from this battleship. So it should be a very interesting day. So as always, you can find information about these events and many others at our Lifetime Learning website, which is at engagement.virginia.edu/learn. And in the meantime, we're going to please stay safe and be well. And we're going to keep the program information on the screen for a few moments. But for now, I want to thank you for being with us, and please enjoy the rest of your evening.